All right, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all this morning. It's good to be with you. And we are going to just continue on this morning in our parable series that we have been walking through. So over the past couple weeks, if you've been coming, we have been studying through the different parables of Jesus. And I have really been enjoying having the opportunity to do that and to look at these parables. We get to hear these stories that Jesus told. These stories that Jesus told his people specifically. We get to learn a lot about, of course, the kingdom of heaven and Jesus' heart and how he sees us, what he thinks about us. But one thing also that the parables allow us to do is to find ways to insert ourselves into the story. I believe that Jesus invites us to find opportunities and ways to place ourselves in the parable so that we can learn from them. We can learn how Jesus sees us and feels about us. And so I just wanted to start off the bat with that. As we look this morning at the popular parable of the Prodigal Son. That's what we're going to be studying this morning. And I just want to encourage you to find opportunities this morning, be alert and looking for ways to put yourself into the parable and how Jesus might be speaking to your heart this morning. So if you want to turn with me, Luke chapter 15 is where we'll be. That's where you find this parable. And just by way of introduction, my name is John Dooley. For those of you that I have not met, it's great to be with you this morning. And for further introduction, I come from a family of all brothers. I have two brothers. I'm in the middle. I have an older brother and a younger brother. And so as I've been studying and looking at this parable, of course, about two brothers. And so, at least on a surface level, I have found easy ways to insert myself into this parable. I also have two sons. I have a daughter, my oldest, but then after her, we have two sons. And so, likewise, this is a parable about a father and his two sons. And Lucas, my youngest son, who some of you may have met, he is 2 years old right now, and he is just a rascal. He is into everything. He is very much a 2-year-old, and he is just at the stage right now where he has not found a table or some kind of structure that he does not want to climb on top of. He has not found a corner that he does not want to dart around as quickly as possible. It seems like whenever we are anywhere, it seems like it's always the store, right? Particularly like in a store, his primary goal is just to get out of our line of sight as quickly as possible. And he's getting pretty good at it. He's getting fast. As I've just been reading and thinking, it's hard for me to even put into words, but I imagine many of you have experienced this before, that sinking feeling, that anxiety that comes when, so I'm in the store with Lucas, he darts around the corner, and I try to catch up, and I look around the corner, and you look, and he's gone. Right, he's gone around another corner or ducked around another aisle, and it's hard to even put into words, but just that sinking feeling where for even just a split second, even just for a moment, my son is lost. I don't know where he is. I can't see him. And likewise, there is then that incredible joy and relief that comes when I kind of go around the aisle and I see him in the next aisle where I hear his little feet running and I can kind of track him down and find him. Just that joy that comes. And so I can only imagine as I look at this parable and this story and this father with his sons and this story of the lost or the prodigal son. But again, I want to just encourage you to find ways to see what Jesus might be speaking to you through this parable. Let's start by looking at the context. Let's look at who Jesus is speaking to. So in the very first verse of chapter 15, we read this. It says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear him. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" So right away, we find out the audience. We find out who Jesus is speaking to. He's actually telling this parable to the tax collectors and the religious leaders at the time. So this would have been the proud, the devout, the churchgoers, if you will, the religious leaders. And Jesus is sharing this parable in response to the accusation, if you will, that he entertains sinners. So this parable Jesus is telling in response to the Pharisees accusing him of having a relationship with and entertaining and knowing those that are lost or those that are sinning. And so in response to that, Jesus actually tells 3 parables. He tells 2 shorter parables, the parable of the lost sheep, and then the parable of the lost coin, and then finally the longer parable of the lost or prodigal son. And like I said, that's the one that we're going to look at this morning. But I want to just start by kind of sharing with us the genre or the idea that we're diving into this morning. Author Dallas Willard and pastor says this of these 3 parables specifically. Dallas Willard said, "The kingdom of God is a place where mercy and reconciliation take place, where there is always a celebration whenever anyone who is lost is found." And that's the theme that we see through these 3 parables. But this third of the 3, the prodigal son, perhaps the most relatable of the 3. It's the longest of the 3, and also because we're talking about people and a family rather than coins and sheep, again, we can maybe find ourselves in the story a little bit more. And I want to challenge us as we start this morning, this parable, as I have just had the opportunity to look at it and study and learn, I have found that it is just absolutely dripping with the gospel story. That this parable that we're going to look at this morning, this truly is the gospel spelled out for us in story form. And that's what Jesus chooses to share to these Pharisees on that day. So let's go ahead and dive in. Again, Luke chapter 15, if you're not there and you want to follow along, starting in verse 11. It says, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them." So we start off here with a pretty jarring request. It's the younger son that basically asks for an early release of his inheritance. He goes to his father and asks for that. It would have been a pretty jarring response. As I've actually studied and looked, maybe not terribly uncommon actually, but certainly disrespectful. At the very least, it would have been a slap in the face to the father. This inheritance that would have been released when the father passes, the son is in some ways communicating, "Father, I want that now." In some ways communicating, "You are as good to me as dead. I want your things so that I can go." So a pretty jarring request, but I think that what's perhaps more surprising is the response. See, the father says, yes. The father agrees. He says, "Okay, that is your decision. You have made that decision. And so here you go. You can take this and you can go." And so they divide up the estate. This younger son would have gotten about 1/3 of the estate, with his older brother getting double what he gets. So they divide it up, and the son would have had to kind of monetize that somehow. And then he takes his things and he goes. And we don't have to wait very long to see just how this goes for him. We read here in the next verse, picking up in verse 13. It says, "Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had and set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything." So we very quickly, I think in some ways, Jesus almost exaggeratingly quick gets us to this point, how quickly it all has come and gone. And we find this son in this just absolutely broke, desperate, helpless state, and certainly what would have been his lowest of lows, as he's taken what the father gave him and he has squandered it all away in what's kind of portrayed to us as the blink of an eye. Just very quickly looking around his life at the broken pieces of the life around him. But it's in this moment that he thinks of home. It's in this moment that he thinks to himself, I need to return home. It's in this moment of desperation that he remembers his father. And this son actually comes to this really telling realization. I think that we can learn a lot from this. We're going to read here in just a second what this son kind of realizes and what he comes to. And I think that we obviously learn a lot about what this son is feeling, but we learn a lot in these next couple verses, I think, about the human condition and again, the gospel story that it points us to. So picking up in verse 17, it says, when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. So this first thing that we see, the first realization that we see from the son, is we find this desire within him to return home. With this state that he finds himself in, he very quickly realizes to himself, I need to go back home. I need to return to my father. See, I need to go back to life the way that it was meant to be. The way that it was supposed to be all along. To go back would be better than what I'm doing. We can take this a step further, and I think it's important to look at this specific realization that the son has, because he says, it would be better for me to go back and to serve my father than to keep doing life the way that I've been doing it. He says it would be better to go back and resubmit myself under my father's authority than to continue living out this messed up version of my life that I have created for myself. Do you see it, church? This is the gospel story right here, played out. See, this, as I read it, this has Genesis 3 written all over it. Going back to the beginning of all things, the original sin, we can take this all the way back to the beginning. And go with me there, if you will. We go all the way back and we find that God had created Adam and Eve. He created humankind in the garden. And they were living in perfection with him and experiencing the richness and the blessing of living life with God, the life in right relationship with him, the way that it was meant to be. But they were asked to submit to the rule and the authority of God. There was rules that they needed to follow, but they got to experience life in that right relationship. But they ultimately had a decision to make. We know and we find that they had free will. They had a decision. And so we know that Adam and Eve were deceived, but they ultimately make the decision. They say, I want to define for myself what is right and wrong. And essentially what they're saying is, I want to, in some ways, be the ruler over my own life. You see, I want to make the rules, and I no longer want to submit to this authority. I want to know the difference between good and evil, and so they took of the fruit and they ate it. And immediately, everything went wrong. And we can now trace that story all throughout history, right? We see that cycle played out over and over again in each life, this condition of sin and this drawing towards wanting to rule over our own lives and to define and redefine the rules and to create rules for ourselves and decide for ourselves what is right and wrong and what it looks like to go out, while all the while, I believe, having a longing deep within our hearts to return home. You see, because of the way that we were made, because of how we were created and that relationship that we were, humankind was created into, I believe that there is a longing deep down within each of us to return back to life the way it was meant to be, to return home to the Father. And so now here we can fast forward and we have Jesus talking to this crowd, and he is telling a story of a son. who was living under his father's house, and he was living in the richness and the blessing that came from being with his father and walking and talking with, who was very clearly a generous and kind and compassionate father. But he had to submit to his rules and authority, right? He lived under his father's house, and so we found at the beginning that he has the ability to make decisions. His father allows him to have that free will, and so ultimately he makes the decision to say, hey, I want to define for myself what is right and wrong. I want to be the ruler over my own destiny, if you will. I want to know the difference between what's right and what's wrong, and I want to go out and see how I can kind of make my way in the world. And so he takes his inheritance, right, and he goes. And almost immediately, we see that all go wrong for him. And the reality is that this is the human condition. We see this cycle continue to be played out in each one of our lives in big ways and in small. As we see ourselves and people around us making decisions, we want to be the ruler of our own lives. We choose to reject other authorities and other law, and we want to define for ourselves what is right and what is wrong. And it's in this moment that this son feels that great longing in his soul. And he says, I need to go back home. I need to return back to my gracious father. And he decides in this moment that he is going to make that turn and head back home. And I wonder, as I shared at the beginning, I wonder if some of you may be finding ways to see yourself in that story. And there may be some of you finding yourself in this place, maybe for the first time, maybe for the 1,000th time, saying, man, to go and to submit under Jesus and live life the way that he wanted me to live it, that would be better than this messed up version of my life that I have created for myself. But we may at times find ourselves wondering, well, what does that look like? What is it going to look like to turn and to repent? And fortunately, that's what we get in this parable. Coming up here, we get this beautiful picture. Jesus very clearly wanting to portray to us the heart of the Father. This is what it looks like to turn back home. And so this young man, he collects his things, which I think are just the clothes on his back, and he starts heading towards home. And all the while, he's practicing his speech. He's saying, all right, I'm going to go back to my father. I'm going to say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son, but please make me like one of your hired men. And he starts heading towards home, and this is where we get this absolutely beautiful picture. Just a couple months ago, actually, one of the last times that I had the opportunity to share here, I used this picture in my sermon just to represent the gracious heart of God. I love this picture that we get. And we can look specifically at the language that's used, and that's what we're going to do this morning, to just draw out a more clear and full picture of the way that God feels about you. And so first it says that while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, was filled with compassion for him, and he ran to his son. I love this idea that the son, still a long way off, his father was very clearly looking and searching for him every day, because he sees him from a long distance and he up and runs towards him. And the scripture tells us that he was filled with compassion. This specific phrase, author B.B. Warfield, he wrote an essay on the emotions of Jesus. And so his essay is all about all the different emotions that we see Jesus experiencing in the Gospels. And this phrase, filled with compassion, which literally means moved to your very depths, this is the phrase that's attributed to Jesus vastly more often than any other descriptive emotion. So I love the idea that this phrase that is so often used of Jesus, Jesus is now telling this story and he's using this phrase to describe the Father's heart. He is very clearly trying to point us to the fact that this is how God, this is how Jesus sees you. And we read on and we find out that the father, he gets to him, he runs to him, and it says that he embraces him. And that word we can literally translate, it says that he falls on his neck. And I love that picture of a passionate, almost aggressive embrace. We read also, it says here that he kissed him. And this word can be translated actually to, he kissed him earnestly. And I was reading Charles Spurgeon, and he said that we can kind of further translate that to say that he kissed him, and he kissed him, and he kissed him, and he kissed him, sparing no love for his son that has returned, just pouring out his love on him. And all the while, his son is trying to choke out his apology, right? He's trying to get out his rehearsed apology. Father, I've sinned against heaven, against you, and I am no longer worthy to be your son. And in the midst of all that, the son can hardly even get the apology out. And this father continues on. He's embracing him, and he's kissing him, and he goes, and it says he gets the best robe, and he puts it on his son's back. And he puts sandals on his feet, and it says that he gets a ring, and he puts it on his son's finger. And all of this is very significant. This would have no doubt been a signet ring, which would have had the family seal on it, allowing this son to now make decisions and have authority in the family again. What this father is communicating in this moment of reconciliation is that you are immediately reinstated back into the family. And I love to think of this little back and forward between the father and his son. And as I've been trying to encourage you this morning, I think this is where I can start to really see myself in this story. I can almost hear myself saying the things that the son is saying. Because the son he's trying to apologize, right? And what is he repeating to his father? He's saying, hey, I am not worthy to be called your son. Like, you don't understand where I've been and what I've done. I am not worthy. But the father, what he is communicating to his son in this moment, with the welcome, with the robe and the ring, is no, but you are my son. I am welcoming you back in. You are reinstated in this moment. You may not feel worthy, but you are my son. And likewise, the son, he can't even quite get to this part of the apology, but what he's planning to say is he's trying to tell his father, well, actually, I'm here, I'm back to work for you. I need to pay you back. Because what he's trying to communicate to the father, hear me, he's saying, hey, father, there is a great debt. Like, you don't understand how bad it is. You gave me a third of the estate, and I've spent it all. It is all gone. You gave me a third of what you had, and I have ruined it. So there is this great debt. I owe you a tremendous amount. I have to come back and I have to work for you in order to work my way back in. And the father won't even entertain it. You see, what once again the father is communicating in this moment is, I have paid that debt. The father is looking at his son. He's saying, hey, I have borne that debt. I'm willing to take it upon myself. Church, this is the gospel, is it not? This is the story of the gospel. This is the welcome. This is the homecoming for those that turn and come in. And the father is so excited, and he's throwing this feast. He talks to the servants around him and says, hey, we're going to throw a feast, and we're going to it's going to be the biggest feast that you've ever seen. This is the picture that we get. And I think that there may be some of us here that as we've been going along, you might see yourself in this story right here. And so I want to just take a moment here, because I think that we all need to be reminded of God's great love for us, of the heart that he has for us and the way that he welcomes us in. I think there are some of you that may be thinking, again, I can put myself here in this story. Maybe for the first time, maybe for the 100th time. And we need to be reminded that this is what God communicates to us. That you may hear yourself saying, oh, but God, you don't understand. I am not worthy. And you need to be reminded of, you need to hear God saying, no, but you are my son. You are my daughter. You were made in my image, and I welcome you in. You might need to just sit and just breathe in that truth this morning that cuts so deep. I also recognize that there may be some sitting here, and you might find yourself thinking, I don't know that I can quite insert myself into the story yet the way that you said I was going to be able to. I don't know if I have kind of seen myself yet, and that's okay. I understand. That might be the reality here. We're going to continue out the rest of this parable, and it's okay because we still have one more character to meet. So like I said at the beginning, there are two sons. There's the older brother who did not go with his little brother. He stayed at home. And as we pick the parable back up, it says that we find him out in the field. And so this older son, he is out in the field, and he can see something going on at the house. He can see that there's preparations being made, and there's obviously a great commotion happening, and he turns to a person next to him and says, hey, what's going on at the house? And the person tells him, oh, haven't you heard? Your little brother's back. Your little brother, he ran away, he came back, and you know your dad, he's been worried, sick about him, and looking for him every day. Well, your brother is back safe and sound. And your father could not be more excited. He's going to throw this huge party. It's going to be the feast of feasts. He's going to kill the fattened calf. It's going to be like nothing we've ever seen. And this news, this reality that his little brother has returned home safe and sound and that his father is excited, this fills the older brother with so much bitterness and anger and jealousy. See, this parable, like I say, it's a beautiful parable. It's dripping with the gospel. We get such beautiful pictures in it, but this part here, this has got to be the great tragedy of it, right? This is the great tragedy of the parable that now we find this older brother, he is out in the field and he is so bitter, so angry that he has actually decided, he said, I'm not going to go in to the house. I'm going to stay right out here in the field. I can't go and celebrate with my brother or my family. This older brother that is going to go on to say, and we'll read here in a moment, he feels in himself, hey, I've been here all along. I've been doing all the right things. I never ran away. I have been here with my father all along. But we see here in this moment that he has very clearly missed the heart of his father. He very clearly does not share the gracious, compassionate heart that his father has. He has missed it all along. And we can see in this moment that though he never left home, that though he's been right there and enjoying life with the Father, he does not see things the way that his Father sees it. And we can argue in this moment that he is just as lost as his brother. But what I love is that we can start to see the parallels, the way that the Father treats both of his sons in this moment. So like the younger son that returned earlier, it says that the father, he ran out to meet him, and he welcomes him back in. Well, likewise, if you look in verse 28, it says that the father goes out to his son that's in the field. So he also goes out to now this older brother that's in the field, and it says that he pleads with him. He is begging with him to come back in. He's begging with his son to come back in the house. He's saying, hey, you are not going to want to miss out on what's happening. And we have to remember here in this moment who Jesus is talking to. Remember, we talked at the beginning, the context. Jesus is delivering these parables to the Pharisees, the religious leaders, the churchgoers of the time, the proud, that feel to themselves that they have been doing things right and following all these rules and doing what they were supposed to do. And here I believe we have Jesus directly addressing these religious folks in this parable. We get to read in verse 29 here this older son's response, and it reveals his heart. It says, but he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never even gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. I think if we were to take this and kind of translate it into modern day terms, it would maybe sound something a little bit like, hey, I've been here all along. I grew up in the church, right? I know all the songs and all the stories, and I have been to all of the classes and the events, and I've checked all the boxes, and I've done my very best to keep my nose clean. And none of those are bad things. Don't hear me wrong. But he is saying with all of this, now what has any of that earned me? What have I gained by all this work that I put in? Haven't I earned anything by working for you for all these years? See, the son has very clearly missed the heart of the father. Tim Keller, who was a great pastor and author, he wrote a book on this parable. It's called The Prodigal God. And towards the end of that book, he says this. He says, do you realize then what Jesus is teaching? Neither son loved the father for himself. They both were using the father for their own self-centered ends rather than loving, enjoying, and serving him for his own sake. You see, the older son, he stayed at home. He never left home, but he very clearly saw serving the father as the means to an end, right? He clearly saw serving his father as, well, hey, if I do this for long enough, if I can do the right things, and then obviously I'm going to gain something at some point. I'm going to get some blessing or reward, or things going to start going really well for me. And so that sounds like a pretty good deal. I'm going to stay and I'm going to serve. He saw loving his father as the means to an end. And church, we have to understand that Jesus, that living a life following Jesus and serving him and loving him, that is the end within itself. That for us, Jesus cannot be the means to an end, but that is the great blessing, to live a life in right relationship with him the way that it was meant to be. I love here, as we wrap up, we get this one more beautiful picture of this father responding, this time to his older son. In verse 31, this father addresses now his older son. He says, my son. Or your translation might have it, my child. Because we can look one more time at the language here because it's relevant. This phrase, my son, we've seen it throughout the whole parable, right? There's these two sons, and one son left home, and the son did this. And then the father said earlier, he said, hey, my son has returned. And every time that word's been used so far in the parable, the Greek translation of that word literally just means male descendant. They're just talking about a son. But here in verse 31, this is the first and only time that we get a different word that's used. It's a different word with a different translation, and it can be more directly translated, my child. And there is a deeper level of intimacy and gentleness and care that this father delivers when he looks at his older son out in the field and he says, oh, my child. And I think that we can almost hear Jesus' heart for these hard-hearted Pharisees in front of him as he is delivering this very relevant final line of the parable. And he says, my child, you have always been with me, and everything I have is yours. We get this picture earlier of the father pleading with his child. He's saying, my child, you have been here, you've been here all along, but you are missing it. You are missing my heart and the way that I see people, the way that I love people, the work that I'm doing. And now in this moment, he's saying, hey, there is a banquet that's being prepared. We are preparing a great feast, and there's direct parallels to what Pastor Seth preached on last week. There's a banquet being prepared, right, church? And this father's pleading with his son, my child, don't miss it because you've been here all along. Don't miss it because you feel like you followed all the rules and checked all the boxes. Don't miss my heart. Worship team, you guys can come on up as we just close out this morning. You see, this younger brother, he left home. He made the decision and he took what the father had, and it says that he left home and he very quickly made a mess of his life. And there's the broken pieces of life, the way that he had tried to do it, all around him. And so he repented and he turned and he went back to the father. But all the while, what he was communicating is, hey, Father, I owe you a great debt. There is a lot of work that I need to do in order to get back in. I owe you a debt because of what I've created. The older brother, however, he stayed. He's been in the father's house all along. He's been serving his father, but he very clearly has missed the heart of the father. And what he is communicating is, well, hey, what have I earned with all of this? What has my work done me so far? What have I gained through all these years of service and all this work that's been done? And the response to both sons is the same. And you need to hear it. The response to both sons is, the debt has been paid. The work has been finished. There is no amount of work that you can do that can make the Father love you any more or any less. Here, this picture, we have two very different sons experiencing things in very different ways, but I think equally as far from the Father. And his response to both is, the debt has been paid, the work has been finished. Come and turn your heart to me. See, church, this is the gospel, it's as clearly as I can present it. And so as we take the next couple minutes and just worship together, if you can go ahead and stand with me. Why don't you stand as we prepare to worship? As we take these next couple minutes and worship together, I want you to just take time in prayer and in thought. What might God be speaking to you this morning? I want to ask the question one more time. How did you see yourself in this parable? What might God be speaking to you this morning? How might he be asking you to respond to his heart? Would you think on that with me as we worship?